Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 1. If anyone is found slain, lying in the field in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and it is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance from the slain man to the surrounding cities. So, if you're out in the field, you're working the field, if you are tending your flock and you're out there and you find somebody slain, not somebody torn apart by beasts, but somebody murdered, then you're going to go back to your city with your elders and your judges. And then they are going to go out and they're going to measure the distance from the slain man where he lies dead without touching him, because you're not going to become unclean in this moment. And they're going to measure the distance to the surrounding cities. See which city is closest to this person. And it shall be that the elders of the city nearest to the slain man will take a heifer which has not been worked and which has not pulled with a yoke. So then those elders of the whichever city is nearest, they're going to take a young female cow, one that's not been worked in the fields, one that's not pulled a yoke, one that's not given birth, one that is young enough and stable enough, but one that has not actually done any work for the people yet. One that is kind of pure in a way. The elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with flowing water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. So they're not sacrificing it. It's not being ritually sacrificed. They are breaking its neck. They are not slitting its throat. They are not bleeding it out. They are just taking it down to a valley with flowing water, one that's not plowed or sown, and they are breaking the heifer's neck there. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to bless in the name of the Lord. By their word, every controversy and every assault shall be settled. So the Levites acting as his mediators in a way, as adjudicators between the people and him, servicing and ministering to the people of the nation, because the nation is not going to be a congregation anymore, one group solidified. It's going to be spread out throughout the promised land. So when these priests come through and they will have the ability to bless, they will now be able to, they will be the ones settling these controversies, that they will be the one going to the Lord in this case. And all the elders of that city nearest to the slain men shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. Then they shall answer or say, our hands have not shed this blood, nor have our eyes seen it. Provide atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not lay innocent blood to the charge of your people Israel. So they're going to wash their hands of the blood, say, we have not seen it, we have not done it, we have not killed this man, we have not seen it, do not know who did this. We have no idea, because if they did, they'd have to bring forward. But provide atonement. Bring us back to a state of being at one with you, because the Lord has said, do not spill innocent blood on the land that I dwell in with you. Innocent blood must be met with innocent blood. That's why the Avenger of Blood exists for these Israelites. So you shall put So you shall put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. So they're asking, let us be redeemed. Do not lay innocent the blood. Provide atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not lay innocent blood to charge your people Israel, and atonement shall be provided on their behalf for the blood by the prayers of the priests. That way, all the innocent blood can be put out of sight from them. So they are not going to be seen as being guilty of this bloodshed, because there are crimes that happen with no witnesses. And they had a very legalistic society. They had rules. The Lord put these things in place. He wanted them kept to a T. And he had every right to expect his children to do as he said. When you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and desire her, and would take her for your wife, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and trim her nails. She shall put off the clothes of her captivity, remain in your house, and mourn her father and her mother a full month. So the cutting of the nails, the shaving her head, the putting off her clothes, it's to put her in a state of mourning. It's to allow her to mourn what happened, because this is a woman who was taken among captives. She was taken from land that you just pillaged, basically, and destroyed in war. And now you're trying to bring her in and make her one of you. But you have to allow her first to mourn those she lost, because that's the decent human being thing to do. After that you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And it shall be, if you have no delight in her, then you shall set her free, but you shall certainly not sell her for money. You shall not treat her brutally, because you have humbled her. So people take this interesting ways. And one is basically saying that, oh, well, you didn't enjoy the sexual activity you had with her, so you didn't find delight in her, so you can just let her go because you humiliated her and you used her and you raped her. It doesn't say any of that. It says, after a full month, if you want to be her husband, then you can have her as a wife. You want to be her husband, you can have her as a wife. And it shall be, if you don't delight in her, if after this month of mourning is gone by, you find no delight in her, then you shall set her free, but you can't sell her for money. You're not to treat her brutally, because you just destroyed everything she had. You've humbled her. You have taken everything from her by way of war. You've humbled her. Now you don't get to just go sell her off as property. You took her to be your wife. You took her into your house. You kind of became this way of a betrothal. And now after a month, you've decided, I no longer want this woman. Now you're sending her away. That's humbling. Maybe even during this mourning, she was expecting to end up as your wife, and you've just decided, no, I've seen what she's like over this month, and I don't want her anymore. People are way too in their own hatred of Christianity, and especially Judaism, that they read everything into it, what they want to project into it. And that's why so often you will see progressive ideologies project into Scripture rape and brutality that is not there, that is not written. It has to be assumed and projected into because you want it to be there, because you want something to hate. But with it not actually being written that way, it's not in it, then you need to find another way to hate. Because Christianity, through Judaism, has done more for women than any other cultural movement in the history of mankind, but it's still viewed as backwards, then you need to read into it something that you can hate. When you have this idea, because you've been taught to hate the Bible and hate Christianity and hate God, that God hates women and looks down on women and it oppresses women, you have to read into it vileness, because you have to offset the verses that say that a husband needs to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Which, if you think about how Christ loved the church, he loved it enough to be brutalized, scourged, humiliated, mocked, and scourging, not simple whipping. The Roman scourging was very different than the Jewish scourging. The Jewish scourging was 39 lashes plus one light one to show mercy. A Roman scourging was often a death penalty. It was meant to rip you to absolute shreds. That's actually kind of why Pontius Pilate says, "This is the man Jesus whom you brought to me," because Jesus was so scourged, he's almost unrecognizable in his current form. He is so brutalized, he is so ripped apart. What they used to scourge, that was often a death sentence based on how brutal it was and how much damage it did to the human body. Then, of course, he allowed himself to be nailed to a cross, one of the most vicious forms of execution there was, and probably has ever been, because that was his love for his church, his bride. We Christians are called to love our bride the same way. That's not really woman-hating if you take into account what all cultures throughout history have viewed women as, and still to this day do. That's why you will see Christians and Western civilization that was brought forth via Christianity having men and women walking hand in hand down the street, but you see other cultures not brought forth out of Christianity having to have the man walk forward while the wife walks 3 to 5 steps behind him. That's the equality, that's the love that God has for his daughters. That is something that when you view that love and you view how cherished women are via the New Testament and even the Old, and how they are raised up to a place that they never were in any other ancient culture and current culture, that you need to read into something to hate to offset the love. We as Christians, our greatest goal is to figure out how to love as Christ. It is something that is so difficult because it goes against our fleshly desires. We are told to bless those who persecute us. Bless, not curse. That is in the Greek and in the tense of the Greek to speak favorably of, continuously, of those who are continuously persecuting you, blessing them and not cursing them. That is love that very few Christians will ever master, because it goes against everything we could possibly view. That's in Romans, by the way. I think. I was listening to a lot today. But most part is Romans, though. But when you hate that love, because it does not allow you the affirmation of your sinfulness, you then need to read in hatred. And that's how you get something as simple as, you wanted this woman as a wife from your captives, because the other option is to kill her. Just, that's what you did with captives. Other ancient cultures would use them as a sex slave or kill them. Those were the two options. Judaism comes along and God says, in my law, you can marry her or you can get rid of her. There's no rape described there. There is rape described in the Bible. That's not it. The Bible's not exactly hesitant to describe rape when it describes the rape of Jacob's daughter and describes the rape of David's daughter. They don't hold back with that. So there's no reason to hold back with this. This is just somebody wanting to read in something negative because it suits their hatred of love that does not affirm sin. But anyway, picking back up in verse 15. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and if the firstborn son is of her who is unloved, then it shall be on the day he bequeaths his possessions to his sons, that he must not bestow firstborn status on the son of the loved wife in preference to the son of the unloved, the true firstborn. So we've kind of seen this unfold slightly with Jacob favoring Joseph over his brothers, even though that wasn't leaving possessions so much as it was him just favoring him throughout his early young adult life. But this is saying if a man has two wives, which once again, people like to read this as prescriptive, saying, well, the Bible allows men to have as many wives as they want. No, the Bible says one man, one woman for life, to become one flesh. The Bible is describing the sinfulness of man, not prescribing the will of God. Those are two different things. There's prescriptions that God would like us to do, and then there's descriptions of the sinfulness for which man lives in. Two wives is the sinfulness of which man lives in, which is why it's calling one loved and one unloved. But he's saying if the unloved wife, the one that is loved less, much like Leah did and had the firstborn in Reuben long before Rachel would end up having a child, that he can't just give firstborn status to the firstborn son of the wife that he did love and say, well, no, that's my firstborn because I loved her more, so I want to favor her child. No, it must be given to the actual firstborn child. But he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. You can't just decide you want to do something different. You're giving the firstborn right to the actual firstborn. You wanted to take two wives and live in sin, that's on you. You will suffer the consequences of that. But you're not going to now damage your children because of your decision to sin. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastised him or chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city, so where they make judgments. So if they have a really stubborn child, doesn't want to listen to his mother and father, they've tried to chasten him, they've tried to punish him, they've tried to do what they could, and he still doesn't want to listen, then they're going to grab him, they're going to bring him out to the gate of the city where you make decisions. In our city structure, we do it in the center of the city normally. City Hall normally is around the middle of a city. Back in these olden days, you sat at the gate of the city is where they made the decisions. And they shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones, so you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel will hear and fear. Once again, people will look into this and say, how could you do that to your baby? You take a child who doesn't want to... A glutton and a drunkard does not describe a child. It describes an adult child, an adult son, not a small child. Because if you got a glutton and a drunkard at 10, you got some issues. You're talking about somebody who is of age and is like the incel living in his mother's basement. That's what you're talking about. A glutton, a drunkard, somebody who will not get their life together, who is leeching off his parents and will not make a life for himself. No matter what they've tried to do, he lives in gluttony and drunkenness. Both things that are preached against, because you need to be moderate in things. So in that case, he is now evil. He is sowing evil and therefore the evil needs to be put out amongst the congregation so that everyone will understand this is unacceptable before the eyes of God. You are not going to be a lazy slug. You're going to go out and do as you're supposed to do. We are called to work, even in the New Testament, even in the epistles, even as Christians under the new covenant of grace. We are told we have work to do for the Lord. We don't get to lay around and be lazy and slovenly. We're told we need to go do work. We need to go provide for our families. We need to procreate and create younger, greater families for the Lord. When you're laying around being a glutton and a drunkard doing nothing with your life, you're not doing any of those things. If a man has committed a sin deserving of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. For he who is hanged is accursed of God. Now, crucifixion would not come around for at least probably a millennia at this point. And it would be something that the Romans would not create, but would perfect. But this is something that the Pharisees go to the Romans with in a way, is that kill them now, do not let them live overnight on those crosses. Because, as you remember, the Jewish day ends or begins at nightfall. When the first 3 stars are visible in the night, that's the beginning of the day. So by 3 o'clock in the evening, you're now looking at it's getting closer to when the next day is going to begin. You don't want them overnight, so therefore they need to break their legs, let them die, let them get them off the crosses, throw them in the mass pit or whatever they were going to do with the bodies, and then move on with their lives because they had Passover coming up. Now, with this, they're saying you're not going to leave him hang on a tree. If this is the way he had to die, you're not going to leave him because he would be accursed of God. Anyone who has to hang on a tree is accursed of God. And that is exactly what Christ became for us, accursed of God. That is why he cried out, Lord, Lord, why have you forsaken me? Because when he took our sin upon himself and became accursed of God, he, the Word of God, the Word became flesh, the Word that became flesh, 1/3 of the Godhead, was separated from the heavenly presence of God the Father. For the first time in all eternity, there is a separation felt that was never there before. And even Jesus cried out. Even Jesus, who knew what the plan was to resurrect 3 days later, cried out, why have you forsaken me? Because he had become accursed for us, to remove our curse of sin that was brought upon by the fall of Adam. If that separation from God the Father would make even God the Son cry out, I do not want to experience it. If just for a brief moment in time, relatively speaking, that Jesus was accursed and separated from the heavenly spirit of the Father, that caused them to cry out, I want to experience zero separation from the Father. I will submit myself to Christ so that does not happen to me. When you talk about fearing God, that puts some fear in me. I'm good. Let's just move on and let's go with God and be good. Moving on to chapter 22. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and hide yourself from them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall remain with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. You shall do the same with his donkey, and shall do the same with his garment, with any lost thing of your brother's, which he has lost and you have found, you shall do likewise. You must not hide yourself. If you see somebody's ox going astray, their sheep, you go help them. When you see somebody having something bad happen, you go help them and try to make it right. If the person is a stranger and you don't know it, you collect it, you hold on to it. If we're somewhere, normally nowadays, we would take it to wherever we're at, take it to a lost and found, they'll hold on to it and the person will go find it. Don't pretend you don't see it happening and sit back and hide and pretend, oh, I didn't see that, oops. I mean, we all do it. But that is not what they were called to do. To be their brother's keeper. What Cain asked God about Abel, am I my brother's keeper? Because this is not speaking about brother as in a biological brother. It's asking about one of their fellow members of their tribe. One of the other people they will be living with. And yes, you are your brother's keeper in that you should help keep them safe and their belongings safe. That way you can live in a cohesive, high trust environment. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. They oftentimes cannot get up on their own, so you would help him lift them back up. You see someone in trouble, you help them. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. People will take this so far and have taken it so far. Women can't wear jeans because it's an abomination before the Lord. It's about wearing something in a deceitful fashion in order to appear as the other thing, not simply wearing it. Men wore kilts. I mean, just put it this way. The way people look at it now is they try to look at it in a way that centers the society and culture in which we live now. When you look at the society they lived then, men weren't really wearing pants. They were wearing robes. The reason why the Lord made the priests say, hey, you're not going to put on stairs leading up to an altar because I don't want to see your nakedness upon me. You know, you're not going to show your nakedness as you walk up the stairs, because lots of times when you're wearing the robes, you're not really wearing anything under them. Men and women were both wearing robes. Different ways of wearing robes, though. But generally, they were wearing tunics and robes and cloaks on top, men and women, but they were styled differently so that you would know one is a woman's garment, one is the other. So a man was not to dress as a woman and pretend to be a woman. A woman was not to dress in men's apparel and pretend to be a man. That was an abomination before the Lord. You were not to try to use that as a way to act out being the other sex. That was an abomination before the Lord. Not simply wearing things that would normally be thought of in your culture as someone else's. A woman wearing pants, not a big deal. A Scotsman wearing a kilt, not a big deal, even though it's a skirt. That's not what it was speaking about. It was not speaking about clothes that look similar to men's and women's garments. It was trying to wear it to distinctly appear as and trick people into thinking you were the opposite sex. If a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself, that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. Don't take the mother and the eggs or the mother and the young. Let the mother stay. She can have more eggs. She can have more young. If you take the young, you can raise the young. And if it's a woman, if it's a girl, and that could very well lay you eggs on your own, of your own. Don't destroy both the mother and the child, because that will limit what you're able to gather in the future. You want to prolong your days. You want to ration out your resources. When you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your household if anyone falls from it. When you build a new house, make sure it's up to code. That's basically what I take from that. You want to have. They normally build houses with flat roofs, and they would often, and still do apparently in Israel, have these houses with flat roofs where people are on top of them, and they will stay up there as well. You would go on top of the house. You can eat up there. We see it in Acts. Peter's on top of the roof of the house, and then he sees the blanket come down with the unclean animals, and God tells him to eat. Parapet, you want to build a fence around it. That way people aren't just falling off of it, and then you're guilty of their bloodshed because of your neglect. Build your house up to code. You shall not sow from your vineyard with different kinds of seed, or you shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. When you sow seed, you sow one thing. That's just basically how you grow stuff. This is pretty much in there probably to tell these people, this is how you actually farm. You don't just throw a bunch of stuff in there. You want to grow wheat. You don't plant it. You don't throw mixed seed into the ground. You throw wheat seed into the ground, or else you're going to have a mess, and it's probably not going to grow. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. That's how we get the idea of not being unequally yoked, because an ox and a donkey cannot pull a plow at the same speed, the same strength. The ox is much stronger than a donkey. You will not be able to plow straight. You cannot do it. Do not be unequally yoked. That's the Deuteronomy verse of it. You shall not wear a garment of different sorts, such as wool and linen mixed together. The idea was that you are not to be mixing. That is the idea of the last three verses, to not mix. Don't mix your seed. Don't mix your animals. Don't mix your garments. Do not mix. Stay pure in your love of God. Stay holy. Keep things separate. Keep things set apart. Some laws don't make sense when we try to think of them today, but they made sense in the way that God is trying to make his chosen people understand that there is a benefit in being separate from those around them, to not intermingle. It was not an ethnic thing. It was a culturally religious thing. You are to follow the Lord your God, period. Don't mix. Stay true to your God. Do not waver. Stay holy and set apart for him. You shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover yourself. And that goes back to, this is a remembrance of the things you've gone through. We see this with the woman with the bleeding issue, trying to just touch the hem of the robe of Christ, to touch the tassel holding off of his robes. That way, they would so often wear these as a way to signify who they were. They would have borders with their families emblazoned on them. But the tassels were a remembrance of who you are, to set you apart from people. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and detests her, and charges her with shameful conduct and brings a bad name on her and says, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found she was not a virgin, then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. So, if there is a man who takes a woman, a wife, they finally have their wedding night, they do what they need to do, and then he decides he hates this lady. He does not want her around. So, in order to get her and get the divorce, he says, she wasn't a virgin. She had had sex before our wedding night. She was not chaste and pure as she was promised to me to be. So therefore, I need to be out of this marriage. Then the mother and father of the young woman will bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity for the elders at the city gate. Now, that's when it gets culturally weird, because when you're a virgin, you bleed on your first intercourse. And they would take the sheets. The parents would actually take the sheets from the bed after they were finished and keep them as evidence of her virginity. So they would actually bring that back out, and you can understand how humiliating that would be, even having to have that presented. Although, apparently, there were times when these people would actually hang that out as evidence in front of their house. But you can understand how, in our culture, that would be incredibly embarrassing to have to prove in that way. And the young woman's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as wife, and he detests her. Now he has charged her with shameful conduct, saying, I found your daughter was not a virgin. And yet these are the evidences of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. Then the elders of that city shall take that man and punish him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name on a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. He's trying to get rid of her. Now he can't. And if you have any idea how vindictive women can be when it comes to that thing, that guy's in for some rough time. Now you say, well, how come he gets to stay with her? How come she can't leave? Well, it was not beneficial for a woman to leave in that case, because she has been defiled. She has had sex now. Therefore, it would almost be as if saying she needs to either stay with him, or she needs to now go back to her father's and either fall into being a woman of disrepute or become a perpetual widow, so to speak. Like, she needs to just be single for the rest of her life. Oftentimes, this was embarrassing enough to probably turn the guy around and make him understand that this is his life now. He now needs to live his rest of his life with the woman he just called a hoe. Not going to be good for him. But if the thing is true and evidences of virginity are not found for the young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done a disgraceful thing in Israel, to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil from among you. Now, if he accuses her and he's right, then that means that she was playing the harlot. She did what she was not supposed to do. If it happened during her betrothal, then she basically committed adultery. And as an adulterer, she is to be stoned to death. That was something that was prescribed to be done. If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die. The man that lay with the woman and the woman, so you shall put away evil from Israel. So if a man is lying with a married woman, they both get stoned. This is the problem with the woman being brought out for adultery in front of Jesus. They say, well, the law of Moses says this woman's to die because she's committing adultery. They didn't bring out the man, though. They only brought out the woman. They were both supposed to be brought out if you were truly honoring the law of Moses. If a young woman who is a virgin is betrothed to a husband, and the man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones, the young woman because she did not cry out in the city, and the man because he humbled his neighbor's wife. So you shall put away the evil from among you. The idea is if she didn't scream out, she was not being raped. This was a consensual engagement that these two went into, and you're now committing adultery because she is betrothed to be married. She is considered his wife during that betrothal, even though the actual marriage has not taken place yet. But if a man finds a betrothed woman in the countryside and a man forces her to lie with him, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. There is in the young woman no sin deserving of death. For just as when a man rises against his neighbor and kills him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the countryside, and the betrothed young woman cried out, but there was no one to save her. So if it was in the middle of a countryside and there was no one to hear, then you can't claim that it was consensual, because you're not going to hear her scream in that thing. See, in a city, these are jam-packed places. She screams out, people hear, and they come to her rescue. In this, it's saying, as I said earlier, people like to read in the rape. This doesn't sugarcoat it. If a man forces her and lies with her, so if he rapes her, then only the man shall die, because he has done something deserving of death. She has done nothing deserving of death. She has done no sin deserving of death because she did nothing wrong. She was victimized. If a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give to the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has humbled her. He shall not be permitted to divorce her all his days. So if a man finds a young woman who's not a betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, so if they're found out, meaning they're now doing this together, then you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to have just wanton sexual relations wherever you want. If you guys are trying to have not even premarital, just sex outside of marriage, you're now having a shotgun wedding. You're now getting married. And because of the way you did this, you are not permitted to divorce her. Period. This is now your wife. A man shall not take his father's wife, nor uncover his father's bed. We see this several times. We see it with Reuben. We'll see it later with Absalom and David's concubines. But we saw this in, I think, Exodus and Leviticus, that you take your father's wife, you are uncovering his bed, you're uncovering his nakedness. You are acting in a deviant and defiled way. All these rules for sexual immorality in the soon-to-be nation of Israel when they go in and take the promised land. All these rules that need to constantly be laid out because humanity is so absurdly sinful that we couldn't figure any of this stuff out on our own. That this is how depraved ancient cultures were. That all these things that God is saying do not do were things everybody around the Israelites would be doing. These are the things that they came out of in Egypt and would be going into in Canaan. and all these surrounding peoples would be doing these things. And the Lord is saying, you will not do them. You will not treat people as these other people treat people. You will have marriages more in accordance to mine, what I see you as being, what I have prescribed. My law has been, since Adam and Eve, one man, one woman, one flesh, living eternally together. That is it. That is, in perpetuity, what marriage was to be. Sinfulness of man forced corruption into it. Forced sinfulness, as we always do. That is not what it was to be. Just because the Bible describes the wickedness of man does not mean God is prescribing men to act in wicked ways. Jesus says this to the Pharisees and the Sadducees when they said, Moses allowed us divorce. What do you say? And Jesus said, God said one man, one woman, for life, one flesh. Moses was allowed to give your stiff-necked forefathers divorce because of their wickedness, because they could not submit themselves to actual godly marriage. Jesus didn't say, well, God prescribed you to have as many wives as you want. No. He said, you guys divorced, you guys did polygamy because you were wicked. That is a description of what the Israelites did, not a prescription of what God was allowing. Do not take the warnings of the Bible and believe they're prescriptions for how we should live our future out. Mankind is capable of insane amounts of wickedness and vileness. That doesn't give us license to go be more wicked and more vile. We need to fight against that, against our nature, and follow His will. And when we have Christ and house the Holy Spirit, we should find that easier. We should find a way to be able to do those things. There's no, we're just living, we're just enjoying where we are now. No, if you're a Christian, you need to go get married. You need to go get married. There's no fun. You go get married, because that's what the Lord has told you to do. You follow Him. You're submitted to His authority. You do as He says. He says to go get married, so go get married. It's just a piece of paper. Okay, well, go get that piece of paper. After all, in the Old Testament, it says that a man needs to give papers to his wife to divorce her. So that means you must have papers to be married. So, go get the papers. Well, that's the government's papers. Oh well, get married by a priest. Who cares what the government has to say? Go get married before the Lord, because that's what He's called you to do. Do not live in sin. The Lord does not affirm sin. He just simply describes the sin we live in. Not the same. That's where we will end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. Hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.